business means a lot to our country. So welcome. Very modestly, didn't want me to lay on his credentials for him tonight, but he's an attorney. He's a former journalist. I'm not sure what former means. It seems once you're a journalist, you're always a journalist. And he's the executive director of the New England First Amendment Coalition, which has contacts, branches, or a network that stretches over 6 New England states. What am I leaving out here? The New England First Amendment Coalition is a group that promulgates and teaches about the First Amendment, about transparency in government, and that's what he's going to talk to us about tonight. Transparency in government and privacy, and I welcome Justin Silverman. Thank you very much, Justin.
Thanks for having me. One thing you did leave out is I'm also from Barnstable, so it's nice to be back in my hometown. Thanks again for having me. As Mark mentioned, I'm with the New England First Amendment Coalition. Just real briefly, some information about our organization, but there's some materials on the table in the back, and I encourage everyone to grab them on your way out to learn more about NEFAC and the work that we do. But in short, we've been around for about 12 years. We're based here in Massachusetts, though we have activity throughout all New England states. And we were created in '06 by a group of journalists that were having some difficulty getting access to government information. Throughout all New England states, public records laws just weren't as strong as they wish they had been. So these journalists got together and said, if we as professional journalists are having such a difficult time getting information, it must be damn near impossible for members of the public who aren't journalists to get access to public records that they're entitled to, get access to open meetings and hear firsthand what their government is doing. Since then, our mission has really evolved to include other aspects of the First Amendment, free speech issues, other press issues, matters of assembly, but the heart of our work is really on government transparency, freedom of information concerns. And that's what I'm going to focus on today. My information's up here. I encourage everybody to subscribe to our newsletter. It goes out once a month. It gives a great recap of all the First Amendment and freedom of information issues that are going on, not only just in the country, but in each New England state as well. Also, too, this presentation, as we go through it, it's really intended to be a conversation. So please just shout out questions, answers to my questions. If you have any comments that you want to make, don't be shy. Just speak up. It's really meant to engage everybody here and to get you thinking about some of these transparency issues that maybe you just haven't given a whole lot of thought to. In particular, what we're going to be discussing toward the end of the presentation are some issues related to government transparency and privacy. I, for one, value my individual privacy greatly, but on the other hand, I also value transparency in government and knowing what my government officials are doing and knowing that my tax dollars are being well spent. And oftentimes those interests conflict or at least go head to head. And it's important to recognize where that tension is and to give some thought about those really difficult situations where individual privacy may conflict with government transparency and our right to know what our elected officials, our public officials are doing. So to begin on the note of government transparency, why are we entitled to government transparency? Why are we entitled to information about our government? Here's the First Amendment. We're a First Amendment organization, and the bulk of our work has to do with freedom of information concerns. But where in the First Amendment does it say that we're entitled to public records or that we can walk in whenever we want to a government meeting? I mean, I've bolded in red here the 5 freedoms that our First Amendment protects. Where do you see government transparency?
To petition the government for free grievances.
Yeah, that's one spot.
But that doesn't work. In my case, it doesn't, because we're also talking about privacy. The Fourth Amendment does that. But then I have right here a letter from a judge in the federal court who says, screw your privacy. I'm taking your letter. I'm reading it. I'm opening it, even though it wasn't addressed to me. Mm-hmm. So, we look at and we read them, but we have a problem today, I firmly believe, with the judiciary. they are more inclined today than they were 20 years ago to legislate from the bench. Read into a statute, read out of a statute, interpret it any way they want, and there's no redress. Because when you go after a judge, as I have, you don't get anywhere because the judge ain't gonna slap another judge around. So yes.
So that is certainly one part of the issues, our right to petition government. That's certainly where we get some of it. And I'm glad that you mentioned the judiciary, because we're going to be looking at a lot of these issues that courts are facing now. Because as I'll explain in a minute, most of our rights when it comes to open government issues come from statutes, come from public records law, open government laws.
I have a question, real quickly. Establishment of religion. That means we cannot have a national religion like the Anglican in England, right? Or prohibiting the free exercise. Now, if they have made no law prohibiting the free exercise, how can people take us to court because I'm wearing a crucifix out in the open?
So if you have, not to dismiss the question, if you have any questions pertaining to religion, I'd be happy to stick around and we can talk about that.
Right.
But I'd like to focus on, just for the purposes of this presentation, government transparency, freedom of information. No, don't be quiet. Don't be quiet. But please let's stick to freedom of information, which we're discussing tonight. And as I mentioned, where is that right to know? You have it in the First Amendment. As you mentioned, you have the right to petition government. You also have freedom of the press, which the press, representatives of the people, we have a right to gather news and to get information. So we do have rights that are inherent in the First Amendment that'll give us this right to know. But where you're going to find that right, where you're going to be able to exercise it and appeal to that right, is most often in our statutes, both our local, state, and our federal statutes. So every state has their own public records law and their own open meeting law. Some are better than others, and I'll go into a few a little later on. We also have a Federal Freedom of Information Act that provides you documents on the federal level from various federal agencies. Most of what we're going to go into tonight is going to deal with public record laws on the state level, but it's good to know that you have access to that information on those different levels. This guy, sunlight is said to be the best of disinfectants. Who's heard this quote before? It's a great quote, right? What does it mean?
I've read it in half a dozen places, but Brandeis, to Justice Brandeis is what said that, and there was a parody on that said something like, if it comes out in the sun, it's going to disappear.
So, I haven't heard the parody, but to this quote right here, what's the sunlight he's referring to? And why do we need it as a disinfectant? Transparent. So it's the truth, right? It's information. It's exposing that information to the public so it can disinfect what? Corruption. Yeah, public misdeeds. Anyone who's interested in the history, that quote was actually thought it would be taken from this guy's quote, James Bryce, who was an ambassador from England. He came over to America and he said this: public opinion is a sort of atmosphere, fresh, keen, and full of sunlight, like that of the American cities, and this sunlight kills many of those noxious germs which are hatched where politicians congregate. Harsh words, but there's some truth there, right? Some truth there, because without that sunlight in the darkness, right, politicians are going to be more inclined to try to get away with things. And there might be more of a likelihood for corruption, for misdeeds. That's why we need that sunshine. That's why we need that disinfectant. And that's why ultimately we have these public records, open meeting laws to get us into government and let us see what's going on. So we can have accountability, because ultimately that's what it's about, right? I mean, we're all here because we care about our government. We want it to work effectively, efficiently, and out in the open. So we know that it's doing right by us, the people, right? It's all about accountability. And as we go through some examples that I have in store for everybody, keep that in mind, because ultimately that's the goal. That's what we're striving for here. And some other things to keep in mind too, because I think even though we might understand these inherently, it really helps to say them out loud and to remember them. The government, right? It serves the public. It serves us. The government works for us. And we need to know if it's acting in our interest. I mean, that's a primary concern. We need to know if the government is acting in our interest, and the only way we can do that is to see what the government is doing. What are those actions the government's taking? And are they acting in our best interest, someone else's best interest? But how can we determine that if we don't have that information? And that information, that transparency, and this is most important, please remember that transparency, that is our right. That is our right. We are entitled to that information. So always presume that information belongs to you, that openness should be there. And unfortunately, be prepared to fight for it, because you're going to face a lot of resistance, a lot of roadblocks in getting documents through the Public Records Act and through open meeting laws. Has anyone filed a public record request? Okay, all right, excellent.
Got no response.
Unfortunately, that's common. I wish I could say that was the
Especially in
exception.
Massachusetts, you don't get any response.
Well,
Secretary Galvin ignores everybody.
well, as you know, Massachusetts has had up until 2 years ago one of the worst public record laws in the country. It's since been reformed to a certain degree. There have been some improvements made, but really it's gone from very bad to kind of
Not so
ranking
good.
in the middle. As far as all public record laws in the country, there's still a lot of improvement that needs to be made. So going to the public records law here in Massachusetts. Before I go to that, does anybody even know what a public record is? Can anybody define what is a public record? We're talking about them a lot. It'd be helpful to know what they actually are.
What I went after was the information on the election in 2012. I wanted to see the certification documents that were filed for Obama with the ballot commission.
So certification. So that's good. So that's an example of how government is doing its business. So generally, a public record is any document that shows how the government is doing its business. Under the Massachusetts state law, a public record are all books, papers, maps, photographs, recorded tapes. It keeps going. It sounds incredibly broad, and you think that it would encompass everything until you realize there are 20 plus exemptions in the statute itself, saying, yes, we can give you all of those things except for all of these things. And that's 20 plus exemptions in the statute, but there are many more exemptions to the public records law that are scattered out throughout other laws. And if you think that's bad, in Vermont, as a point of comparison, there are over 280 exemptions, and the list keeps growing. Wow. Going back to Massachusetts, though, one of the reasons that Massachusetts has one of the weaker public records law is that it happens to be the only state in the country where the governor's office, the legislature, and the judiciary are all exempt or claim to be exempt from the law. That's a tremendous amount of documents right there. So even if you're getting your response, and even if you're getting all of the documents that you're entitled to, and you're getting those responses in record time, and everything seems to be working out great on that end, you're still not entitled to all of these documents. What's going on in the governor's office, the legislature, the judiciary, the court system? Most often we don't know. We're not entitled to those records.
That only applies in the state. If you take them to federal court, they have to produce them.
Right. So yep. Just to remind everybody, what we're discussing now is the Massachusetts state law. Different in all states, different on the federal level. But being in Mass, most of these examples will focus on Mass and some other New England states. Not all hope is lost on this, by the way. There is a commission that meetings are ongoing. It's established right now to look at this issue and determine what, if any, changes could be made to this. So there's more accountability within the governor's office, the legislature, and the judiciary. But it's a really difficult issue, right? Because who's on the commission?
Politicians.
Right, the very people we're asking to open up and be more transparent. Right? That's a tough sell.
Fox has gotten the hand.
But it's a really important one. And the commission is a good first step, and hopefully some kind of progress will be made from it. But time will tell. Some common challenges. I said we're gonna focus on privacy, but just in case you're not very well acquainted with the public records law. Some other common challenges are money. Many public records requests by statute, different agencies are allowed to charge you for those documents. Oftentimes the charge is reasonable. Oftentimes it's not. Oftentimes you'll be charged thousands, if not tens of thousands of dollars for reams of documents that may or may not be relevant to your actual request. Money can often be prohibitive as far as public records are concerned. Time as well. Depending on your request, you could ask for certain documents and be met with a response that's going to take X amount of months or a year plus for this agency to go through these documents, segregate what we need to, find the information that you're looking for, and then provide it to you. Well, I guess that's all well and good if the information you're looking for isn't time sensitive. I mean, imagine being a reporter working on deadline, looking for information to inform his or her community, and you're being told, we'll give you that information in a year. Well, what good is that going to do, right? And security, national security, security within the state, also referring to law enforcement and investigatory issues. Big issue here in Massachusetts, working with the state police in particular, who are notoriously tight-lipped and not transparent. How do we get documents about our law enforcement when there's such reluctance to give it to us? And exemptions based on security. Some are very valid. I don't want to imply that some of these exemptions are all nonsense. It's not. Many of these exemptions, as intended, are valid. Some of them aren't, and many of them are being used in ways that they shouldn't be. So to give everybody some ideas to some of the issues that we work with as an organization, again, just working within this tension between private privacy rights, individual privacy rights, and transparency. I've come up with a number of scenarios, and I'd like to get your feedback. And again, this isn't to give anyone a report card on where you stand on these issues or to grade anybody. It's just to get you thinking about some of these really difficult issues. Some are really profound dilemmas between privacy and transparency. I lead an organization where every day I work toward this transparency, but sometimes it's good to remember, there's some really valid and legitimate privacy interests at stake too. How do we balance them? Should they be balanced, or should we always have that transparency? These can be really difficult questions, and I hope at the very least everyone walks away tonight thinking about some of these questions and what they entail. So let's go. We just spoke about security, law enforcement. So let's go to one of the most commonly requested public records. Before I do that, though, I just wanted to show this to really emphasize the point about transparency. This is a section of a guidebook given to all sheriffs in Rhode Island. The guidebook goes into everything related to policies, and in this case, how to deal with the public. And if you'll notice, there's a section on truthfulness. And crossed out at the end, it's hard to see the cross, but crossed out at the end are the words "or members of the public." So you shall be truthful and honest in dealing with fellow members of the Division of Sheriffs, and not members of the public. I don't know if that's what they intended, but that's certainly the revision that was proposed. And by the way, how did we get our hands on this? Public records request, right? We asked for it. We used the Access to Public Records Act in Rhode Island to ask for this document and any proposed revisions to it. And this is what we found.
How much did you pay?
No, I couldn't tell you. I said we asked for it. I think it was one of our affiliate organizations or one of our partner organizations who had requested this and passed this along to us as an example of one of the documents. I don't know how much was paid.
How long it took?
I don't know. And for something like this, where you have like a guidebook, usually they're given pretty quickly. There isn't much dispute over whether or not this is public or not. Most of the delay comes in when you have a very lengthy request that involves many documents or hard to find documents. But for something that's already produced, published, and on hand, I don't know the answer to your question, but I wouldn't assume it took very long. But you have to ask, right? You're not going to get it unless you ask. All right, so let's go to police reports. This might be the easiest question of the day. Police reports, public records. Can we go into a police department and ask for police reports? Are we entitled to them? Has anybody asked for them? Well, the short answer is yeah, they're public records. Public records. Why should they be public records? Why should we be knowing what our police are doing?
wanna know what the guy across the street from you is guilty of.
Yeah, you want to know what's going on within your community, right? Yeah, what's going on in our neighborhoods? Who's getting arrested and why? Are these arrests legit? Sure they are, but how do we know unless we actually know the arrest occurred, right? Is everything in a police report public? Yeah, yeah. So just because a document itself is public and you're entitled to it doesn't mean you're entitled to all the information in it. It can be redacted, like this one shown right here. And it can be redacted for a number of reasons. But keep that in mind. It's an important point, not just to let you know that if you get a redacted document, that might be allowed under the public records law. But you might be told that the public record you requested, you're not entitled to. But under the law, you are. And you can always respond, well, I am entitled to this record. And if there's anything that's exempt, any information that's exempt, you can go ahead and redact it. But just because there's something exempt in a particular document doesn't make that document itself exempt. Same goes for police reports.
Now, why would they exempt some information?
It depends on what the information is. One of the most commonly used exemption is the investigatory exemption in Massachusetts. So if there's some sensitive information related to an investigation that got out into the public that would jeopardize that investigation somehow, then under the law, that could be redacted or not given at all.
What about underage?
Questionable. It depends on the circumstances, who it is. But to get to the investigatory exemption again, while it may seem on its face like a valid exemption, and I think it is, it can often be abused. There's one, I believe it's a 50-year-old murder case, 1952, I believe. It was reported by Todd Wallach in the Globe. It was a murder case that's decades old. I believe it's over 50 years old now. A request was made for records, police reports in this murder case. No leads, no suspects. It's been cold for decades, but the respective police department wouldn't release the records, claiming that it's ongoing. Well, are there any leads? Are there any breaks? No, there haven't been for many, many years, but it's ongoing. We can't give it to you. So again, you have an example of an investigatory exemption that's valid. Like that's something that I think the law enforcement should have. That's a valuable tool to help them do their jobs. But how do we make sure that that tool is not abused? In often cases, it is. This is a tweet by a reporter at the Providence Journal. Like I said, you're going to get a mix of different states here. Just know that every state's public records law is different. That said, many of the issues, reporters specifically, members of the community encounter, are similar state to state. And in this case, this tweet from last year, she said she spoke with the Rhode Island State Police, and they told her that they have a new policy where they're not going to name or identify any crash victims in car accidents. If you have a car accident on your road in your neighborhood, well, this would be state police, so on a state highway, it's happening in public view for everyone to see who drives by. And state police are saying, no, we're not going to tell you who was in it. Is that good? Bad? How do you feel about that kind of policy?
That's bad.
Why? Why is it bad?
There's a whole lot of reasons why.
Give me one. Give me the first one that comes to mind. Why should we know who was in that accident?
Well, what if it's a relative of mine, a son or a daughter, or a husband, or, you know.
Someone who's not supposed to be.
I would like to know that.
Yep.
What if it's, somebody else?
A drunk politician.
Yeah, there we go.
Yeah, what if it's going to take anything?
Yep. Let's go back to the theme that I started with, right? Accountability. Of course, we want to know if it's a family member that was in the accident. We want to know if it was a neighbor. We want information. Of course we do. And on a personal level, we want that. But when it comes to public records, like what's the ultimate goal? What are we really trying to get at? Accountability for our state police, our law enforcement, to make sure that they did their jobs appropriately. And what if it was a politician? What if it was a politician who was drunk at the time?
Like the judges.
Yeah.
Shouldn't we know that?
Exactly.
What if it was their 8th DUI?
Well,
And we never got the name for the previous 7? I think that's a problem, right?
we play devil's advocate.
Yeah. Here's a-
You have an accident, 2 vehicles involved. They release the names, it's in the stranded times or whatever, tomorrow morning. Everybody reads it, they say, oh, I know who that is. Okay, those people have not literally done anything wrong. They may be being charged. Have they been charged? They have a right to privacy because they're not guilty of doing anything. And yet there are people out there, "Yeah, I know that guy, he's a drunk, he beats his wife, kicks his dog, and it's not true.
It's a great point, and that's where you have the balance, right?
Yeah, exactly.
But how do you accommodate that interest of that private individual while still allowing the transparency for all the public officials?
Because 2 days later, if you're really interested, you can go down and get the filing that was supplied by the officer who reported it. Those they can't keep away from. While it's a reporter who wants to know who was driving the car, I say, hey, who are you? You don't need to know. It's not a need to know.
But who should be making that decision?
I would say the policeman on the scene.
Is that who we want to make the decision about what the people know?
Absolutely.
The government?
You have to give them some trust. Not much, but you have to give them some. You know?
How much trust you give them will be.
Because, my wife had an accident. Guy come out of a side street, cut right in front of her, tore the front end of her car off, okay, and stopped right in front of her. She was on the highway, okay? The cop spoke to the guy who drove the car and spoke to my wife. He says to my wife, "You're at fault." She said, "Huh? I'm in the left-hand lane. I'm going to make a left-hand turn. He comes out of a side street and hits me this way. How can I be at fault?" He's sticking up for the guy because he knew.
Well, again,
Ah, okay.
we need to know about
Right.
that. And ultimately,
That's it. You
ultimately,
find
we
that.
won't- but don't, we, the people want to make the decision about what's going on in our streets, whether we should know it, rather than leaving that decision to whatever sergeant is in command that particular night. I'm not dismissing the concern. I think it's a good one, but again, you have that balance there. What about, this is one that I bring up in classrooms quite a bit. What about private colleges? Go down to Boston University, private college, for example.
Mhm.
You have students, BU students throughout the whole area. Many are living off campus on private roads in apartments. But you have campus police patrolling both on campus and in those private areas. This isn't uncommon, by the way. This happens on many private campuses. Again, where are those lines as far as law enforcement records go? In Massachusetts, if BU police or any private college police go into a public way and make an arrest or deal with a student somehow, that's not considered a public record, but it happened in a public area. So there's this debate now about, well, you have this law enforcement role being carried out by private campus police, but it's happening in public areas. Shouldn't we have a right to know what's going on in those areas and what those police are doing, even though they're not an arm of the government? They're still performing that law enforcement role. It brings up a lot of interesting questions that haven't been resolved and are probably being debated. Yeah.
Does the Boston Police Department have jurisdiction over what happens at private colleges?
Actually, on the campus itself? Or,
Yes.
I don't believe so. I don't know for sure, but I believe the campus police themselves, they're the ones that have jurisdiction. It is ultimately private property.
Okay.
It's a private.
They have to be
access to
summoned.
my private property.
They have to be called. The Boston police can't go on a private property without being invited.
Yeah. But what about public property? I mean, that's really the issue, is that when you have a private police force acting in public, shouldn't we know what's going on?
Yes, because they're not, that's
The
not.
locus is
their
important.
Sphere of influence is not supposed to be in the public sector.
But oftentimes for private universities, it is. So, that's one issue that, that's being looked at, and I don't think gets enough attention. Are those police reports that are down at the campus public safety department that are dealing with off-campus incidents? Like, should we, the public, have access to them? What about accident photos? Gruesome stuff sometimes. Are they public records?
It should be.
Why?
We paid for the camera.
You teach young kids how to drive, you want to get the fear of reality into them. This is
Doesn't
what
it
happens
depend on
when
who
you're
took the
texting
photo?
and driving.
Well, let's talk about accident photos generally taken by police, investigators at the scene from state or local police departments. They go up to an accident that happened on a public road. This one appears to have happened on a state freeway. As part of their investigation, they're taking photos of the accident. Those photos, by most public record laws, are public. Isn't that like an incredibly private thing? I mean, if you were in that car or someone you knew or loved was in that car?
No, it's after the fact.
Well, I'm sorry.
After the fact, what they're taking pictures of.
So is everyone pretty much in agreement that we should have access to accident photos?
I don't see why not.
Can anybody tell me why we shouldn't?
Well, they're subject of investigation, they're materials for an investigation, so they could be withheld.
It could. Ultimately, though, after the investigation, should we have access to them?
Well, if it's a public space and it's taken by a public employee, I guess.
Public equipment.
Investigation.
I'm sorry?
Why after the investigation?
That's a good point.
Usually in cases of auto accidents, there are at least two parties involved. It seemed to me that both parties should be entitled to those photos taken at their expense.
Yeah. Well, it wasn't implying that you should only have them after the investigation. I
Everybody-
said I wasn't implying that you should only have them after the investigation. I was just following up on Mark's comment that even if they were to be withheld, improperly or not, should we have them after the investigation? Should we have them at all? It seems like most people would agree that we should. What if I told you that on the other side of this car is a 16-year-old driver hanging upside down, dead and badly mangled? Many photographs were taken of her and her body.
You can redact that just like a document.
Yep, you could redact it. It's one thought. Should we have access to the photos otherwise? Just redact the gruesome stuff?
What if it's a private citizen who has taken these photos, sells them to a newspaper?
Well, then we're not dealing with a public record, right?
That's right.
Remember, a public record taken by a public employee documenting the agencies, whatever body they work for, documenting how they work, so we the public can see how they operate, make sure they're operating in our interest.
Look, there's an injury involved, the medical situation is going to come up against HIPAA laws as well. So,
Yep.
or potentially.
In this case, the 16-year-old woman's dead. I'm not sure you're going to run into HIPAA laws based on the privacy rights of someone who's dead. But let's say for argument's sake that HIPAA doesn't apply. Should we have access to the photos? You suggested, Michael, that we could just redact the gruesome stuff, which might be a reasonable solution. But who's going to determine what's gruesome enough to redact?
Don't they use them in court cases? If there's
Yeah.
suits?
Yeah, oftentimes, yeah.
Yeah, and insurance companies and show, right?
So all good points. But go ahead.
Well, in some cases too, I feel like pictures can tell more of the story of what happened. I know when I was in high school, like who I went to school with was actually, he died one night being chased by an officer on his dirt bike.
Mhm.
And there's a lot of controversy over what actually happened and how it led up to it. And there's a lot of secrecy about the crime scene photos and what actually happened. So I feel like pictures can tell a story no matter how gruesome they are. Sometimes it's the only truth when there's only one party there left to tell it.
It's a great point. I'm gonna address that in a minute with another photo. The story behind this, if anyone anyone's interested, this actually happened in California. Police showed up at the scene, took photos of everything, including the deceased driver, and then sent those photos to family and friends, with some kind of, not family and friends of the driver, but their own family and friends, with a caption along the lines of, be careful when you're driving, some precautionary message like that. Those photos were ultimately leaked to the public, leaked publicly, and then posted online. And then others, not law enforcement, but others, then took those photos and started sending them to family members of the dead driver. Those family members have since been, according to them, have been so harassed that they can't go online anymore, can't open up email for fear of seeing a photo of, and I've seen the photos, they're horrible, they're gut-wrenching. And to see those photos in their inbox, or to go online and Google their name and see their daughter's file.
Well, I guess that's a throwback from technology, isn't it?
It is.
Sometimes
It's a
it's
balance.
wonderful and sometimes it's a bad.
Right. So you have that trade-off. I mean, what a horrible thing to do to a family. But to your point, if we don't have those photos, how can we be informed? And I often hear the argument, well, what kind of information are you going to get by looking at this girl's body? Well, what if I told you, and this wasn't the case that I know of anyways, I'm just adding to the hypothetical here. What if I told you that the reason she died wasn't just a crash, but that her seatbelt failed? Wouldn't we want to see documentation on that? How are we going to see documentation of that if we're censoring that whole area?
And I would say the lawyers for the people who are going to be involved in all the lawsuits have a direct interest in obtaining those photos.
Well, don't we as well? Don't we, the people, have an interest in knowing what seatbelts and what cars are failing and if they are failing?
Well, I know they all are.
I don't know about that, but I know what happened in this case. Does anybody know what this is a photo of? Oh,
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
I can wait till you ask my question.
Dale Earnhardt died.
That's right. Yeah, this is from Dale Earnhardt's crash. Does anyone know the public records battle that ensued in Florida after this crash? What was the cause of death?
He detached his Hans device.
There was also some speculation that the seatbelt failed and that it ripped. So the newspaper down in Florida made a public records request for not only the crash photos, but the autopsy photos to see the imprint of the seatbelt or where it might be, to see with their own eyes, reporters, editors, and not just take the word of the police investigators and those that were on the scene, but to see with their own eyes, well, was there a seatbelt issue? And it was a very long court battle over these public records. And mind you, Florida has one of the best, or one of the strongest public records laws in the country. Transparency, openness, it's written right into the Florida state constitution. Talk about Massachusetts being down here somewhere, Florida's way up here. But this battle ensued over public records, and ultimately they got these photos. And I think there's still some controversy over whether or not the seatbelt, was a contributing factor.
My question concerns court records.
Yep.
And it specifically concerns a deposition.
Okay.
If somebody is deposed, then is their deposition a private record until it becomes public in court? I don't know if you have any examples like that.
Well, we can talk more about it afterwards. I dealt with that, and I'll give you the response that most people hate hearing from lawyers, but it depends. When it comes to court records, there's a lot of factors that are considered, but ultimately records can be sealed in court for a number of reasons. So I can't answer that specifically, but we can chat more about it afterwards. Email. Now, this is within the last year or two, anyways. This has been a really hot issue, one that we've been involved in. Email from personal accounts. Again, we're talking about public records, public officials, not your Gmail accounts, but your governor's email account, your mayor's, your city councilwoman's email account. I think we would all agree, as we should, that any emails that are sent to a city provided email account, a state provided, a public provided email account would be public records. But what happens when government business is starting to be conducted over Gmail?
Still should be public.
Why?
Because they're hiding something from us.
The-
If it's public business, it's public business.
This isn't a public document. This is an email on a Gmail account. That's, if I'm the mayor, I'm saying that's my private email. And it's, get your, talk about my privacy.
Not if you're conducting our business.
The question is, you have a government account to do government business. No problem. We can get that with no trouble. But when you pull a Hillary and you've got the machine in your closet, okay, and you're sending sensitive information through that server, okay, now, that's in violation of Article 6 of the United States Constitution and the oaths and obligations.
As far as emails are concerned, the
Yep.
content in them.
What did they say? They took an oath and an
No,
obligation.
there's no violation in using personal emails to conduct government business in a lot of cases. What is the issue is whether we should have access to them and what most states are now finding, according to the courts. Absolutely, for all the reasons that everyone just explained. If you're conducting government business on a personal email account, it doesn't matter where that information lies. It's pertaining to the government and the work that you're doing. The public has a right to it.
Sure, it seems that the medium would be irrelevant. If that person is in a restaurant and gets a phone call on the house phone regarding government business, or whether they're in a room speaking to somebody, or using that account to email, it seems the medium would be irrelevant, and it's just the fact that it's public business.
Yeah, it would, and it seems very, it seems like it's common sense. It seems like that's something that just intuitively we should all agree with, but it hasn't been within many states. I mean, this is a debate that's still ongoing. I mean, this decision right here, this is a California decision, date March 2017. I mean, this is a relatively recent one. Here's one that we were involved in Vermont. This was last year, a question going all the way to the Vermont Supreme Court. The question being, does the Vermont state public records law, does that encompass the personal email accounts of government officials? That was a question that went all the way to the Supreme Court, the state Supreme Court, because there were arguments made that no, the public records law is about public documents. It didn't intend to, and it certainly wasn't within the spirit of the public records law to incorporate all of these privately used accounts. So the argument went. And our organization filed an amicus brief in this case, arguing otherwise, making an argument that seems as clear to us as it does to everybody in this room. Like, no, the medium doesn't matter. What matters is the content. If you're discussing government business or not. Otherwise, I mean, what a tremendous opportunity to abuse your power. Just have all of your conversations through Gmail. Like, don't use your government issued account at all. Fortunately, the court agreed. And now in Vermont, those emails, even if they're on private accounts, if they're pertaining to government business, we have access to them. Yeah.
Where is Massachusetts with that at this time? Because I run into two boards of health on Cape Cod, a appeals board and a planning board, where individuals communicate via the private. And then if you ask for information, the only thing you get is the public communication.
Well, here's the difficulty, right? Because you're running, I'm not surprised that you're running into this, and I wouldn't be surprised if people in Vermont are still having difficulty getting those emails, because even though you have the highest court in the state saying you're entitled to those emails, how do you get them?
Freedom of information.
All right, so we make a request. Give me all of your emails pertaining to X, Y, and Z in both private and publicly issued emails. Submit that request. The agency gives you a bunch of emails that were on the public account. How do you know what's on the private account? Like, unless you were actually in that account looking through all the emails, like, how do you know that there's anything in there of substance that you're entitled to?
Look on Anthony Weaver's computer.
In my case,
How does the person?
Hold on 1 second. 1 second.
in my case, they actually entered documents into the record that had these personal email addresses with information on them, and then denied that anyone had access to the feeds.
But let's talk more after
And that
about that
was
specific case.
Freedom of information request.
I'd like to hear more about that, because oftentimes the issue is evidence. And I'll get to your question in just a minute, but oftentimes what states are doing to solve this problem, and I use that word reluctantly because it's not really solving, in my opinion, is that all that's required of the government official is a good faith search of their private email account for any relevant documents. And then without further proof that they missed some or that they're hiding some, there's no requirement that anything is submitted. So essentially, you're relying on the good faith of government officials to provide documents that you're entitled to. Maybe some will come through.
That they're all in bed with one another, and they're covering for each other.
Well, some certainly
And,
are.
you know, but what's new in human history? Human government has always been flawed.
Right.
For human beings, you can't give them power, and they get greedy and greedier and greedier. So,
You're absolutely right. I mean, and then that's the difficult part.
Understood our human nature.
And that's why you need that transparency, right? But how are you going to get it on these private email accounts?
So if you're in the private sector,
Yeah.
and you're subject to a lawsuit, the attorneys come in, they subpoena all your records, and like email records, and I'm not personally been involved with involved in claims against my company, and you have to submit all the information and so forth, and they want all the relevant information. That's never happened to me, but I've heard stories where they actually come, they want to get access to the hard drives, they get a court order to get access to, your drives, anything that's relevant to this particular case. So now, if a private citizen in a civil matter is subject to that type of inquiry, why would not a public official be likewise subject to the same scrutiny?
Well, you're dealing with two different things, right? You're dealing with the operation of the judicial system, and you're dealing with public records that are accessible to everyone, not just litigants in a case. So there are certainly concerns there. But as far as the law is concerned, you're dealing with different requirements and different goals. Within the judicial system, a subpoena is provided to further justice, whereas public records are provided to inform communities as a whole outside of the court and to provide transparency. So it's not to say that there aren't issues, but there are different goals and different mechanisms that are being used there. Surveillance video.
Some mechanisms work and others don't.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, in fact, with the Massachusetts Public Records Law, there are many parts of it that don't seem to be working. Prior to, we have a better procedure in place now, but prior to the latest changes, there just wasn't any enforcement mechanism. You either had to rely on the Attorney General to take a public records case on your behalf and to bring it to court, which rarely if ever happened, or you need to just bring it to court yourself. And who has the money and time to do that? Not many people. Here's a situation with the surveillance video. This woman right here, she's a Connecticut resident. This is a Connecticut case. She was a student at UConn, walking down the street, past a fire department, may have stopped by the overhead door where the trucks come out of for a moment. And at that exact time, the overhead door did come up. A truck came out, hit, and killed her. Across the street, there was a camera that captured the entire incident. The judge ruled that it wasn't a public record and that we shouldn't have access to it. Out of the privacy concern for not just her, although some would argue that she doesn't have a privacy interest because she's deceased, but for her family and for anyone that knows her, that would inevitably see that surveillance video. So the judge ruled, no, you're not getting it to the Hartford Current. You requested it. Yeah.
Who was trying to get it? For what purpose?
The Hartford Current was trying to get it. But let me ask you this, should it matter? Should it matter who's trying to get it?
Sure.
Why?
What purposes are protected under the Constitution and what purposes aren't?
Well, we're not dealing with the Constitution. We're dealing with public records laws, state public record laws. And in Massachusetts, it doesn't matter what your purpose is. You're not required to tell anybody what the purpose is. You're not even required to tell them what your name is. might be a little difficult to get public records. No, I am, under state laws, you asked me about the Constitution, I presume the US Constitution, but under state law, it's different. And the law.
Yeah, it should be different, it should, yeah, but it shouldn't be different.
Who owned the camera?
All right, well, I just want to make sure that I'm addressing your question as best as I can.
But my claim is it does matter. If the law says the purpose doesn't matter, then the law is wrong.
Most laws, that the purpose doesn't matter because what's the objective is to get that information out to the public and to inform them. So why? Going back to one of the very first slides, accountability.
Well, wait a minute, accountability. What's the?
Well, no. These can be. I'm sorry. I'll get to your question in 1 second. These can be tough issues. Let me give you some additional facts of this case. The DA in this case ruled that the operator of the fire engine wasn't negligent in any way, and no charges were brought in this case.
On what basis did he rule that? What basis did he rule one way or another?
Was
he appointed to
looking at the video.
By
By looking at the video, he made that determination. Is that good enough? How do we know that the right determination was made? It probably was, but how do we know?
What about the woman's family? Would she want to access the video to be able to make her own determination?
She might, I'm glad you brought that up because in but in some public records cases, the law doesn't protect the person who's even included in the record. There have been cases, instances in Massachusetts where a private individual had an encounter with the police and was named in a police report, but wasn't given that police report, even though they're the ones that requested it.
Well, let me just follow on question. Because in this, it says the parents were asked the judge to block their use of the video.
Yeah.
So they want to protect their family from exploitation.
Just like what happened in California.
Because if they already viewed it and had their legal counsel review it and they're satisfied that the ruling was correct, the private citizens are not entitled to some sort of privacy in an agreed situation.
So that's a very good question, and it's a tough one to answer. But again, there is a balance, right? Because aren't we, as a counter argument, aren't we as a public entitled to see the video that was the evidence to determine whether charges were brought or not? Like, don't we want that kind of oversight to make sure that the right decision was made? Of course we do, but at what expense? There's another. This happened in Florida. Another example. Everyone remember football player Dante Stallworth? He used to play for the Pats, but at the time he was playing for the Browns. He was involved in a hit and run, and he's driving down the street. And according to him, an individual jumps into the middle of the road. He collides with them, and that individual died as a result of the accident. He claimed that this person came out of nowhere, but there were images of the accident, surveillance video of the accident. The judge at the time wouldn't give anyone access to that video because of, as I highlighted, the judge said that it would be akin to autopsy photographs showing the video of this accident. Are those two the same? And what do you think of that comparison? Is that a fair comparison? Is that unreasonable? A surveillance video of an accident where it's one person's word against any witnesses that may or may not have been there, and then autopsy photographs. What's the difference between the two?
The video was the witness.
Yeah.
What was the judge's point?
Judge's point
was whether it's similar to an autopsy or not.
The judge's point is that there was such a high privacy interest that she wasn't going to release the video. But just think about it. And again, I'm not forcing anybody to come to one conclusion or another. But oftentimes these comparisons are made. And some of them are unreasonable. Because even though there is a privacy interest in that video, is it the same as an autopsy photograph? I mean, is it an autopsy photograph? Much more personal and intimate than a surveillance.
This is a case of you have a right to confront the information that's being provided against you and whoever's providing it. If they don't give you that, they're obstructing your right to due process.
So you're talking about within the court. It's an important distinction.
Yeah.
I'm talking about
When a judge-
outside the court with the
Right.
public. Should the
Who was
public-
requesting the video?
In that case, I don't recall. It was probably a member of the
Yeah,
press.
it's a tough call. I said, and I hate judges, but, they still have to do things like this, make decisions. And whether it's a right to know or a need to know, I think, has a lot to do with it. Your right to know may not be filling a need, okay? You're curious, you want to see it, okay? It has no need, it's not going to benefit the public or anybody else. And fact is, as you see, the right to privacy, it could hurt somebody. So, the guy up there in the black robe, he's sitting there, and he's got some bunch of things to weigh.
He's got that balance.
Yeah, as long as he doesn't violate the canons under which he has to operate.
Let's move on to body cameras, which is probably the most hot button issue facing public records advocates today. Most states are still wrestling with their policies as far as whether or not body camera footage is public, whether it should be public, under what circumstances. Body cameras showing the actions of police. Should it be public? Should we be able to go into a police department and request a copy of body camera footage in the same way that we can request a police report?
To what extent is the party interested?
It's such a broad question, because every case can be totally different.
Yeah. Connecticut, by the way, kind of took that approach, and for better or worse, they said body camera footage, of course it's a public record, but we're going to enact certain policies that protects the privacy of individuals. So you're not always going to get the footage, and you're not going to get it in certain circumstances, but it's presumptively a public record. Here's a case that happened in New Hampshire, and I'll end with this. We're low on time, but here you had a suspect being approached by two police officers. The suspect had a knife. He's being told, I'm going to show you the video in a moment. He's being approached, he's being told to put the weapon down, and ultimately the suspect is shot and killed by police.
Yeah, and I've had that.
Yeah,
Yes.
just don't bring a knife to a children.
The question is, should we have access to the video?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Why?
Want to see if the police officers act properly.
The judge in this case said no. The judge in this case said, initially anyway, said, no, I'm not going to give you the video because I'm concerned about the privacy of this person's family, his wife, his kids. They shouldn't have to see their dad dead on the ground. But what I will do is give you this one frame of the video. So initially, that's what, I believe it was the union leader in New Hampshire that initially asked for this. They got this one frame. Is that helpful?
No, it was kind of far away.
It is. I guess it's helpful. Might be helpful in one respect. Why do you think this frame was chosen?
Shows the knife.
Knife in his hand or something.
Yeah, and he's facing the police, so there's an active aggression. So there might be an argument there that reasonable force was used. Ultimately, they did get more of the video. There's nothing graphic here showing it, but I do want to show it to you. Just ask a couple follow-up questions, and we'll wrap up. Here's what ultimately was released. For the purposes of this, the audio isn't so important. So the police are telling them to stop.
And there's two police officers there?
I believe there's two police officers there. This is the footage from one camera. telling the suspect to stop. Making the order several times. He's retreating. He turns around, starts to charge, and then disappears. What happened?
Well, sure.
Why is he gonna?
Yeah, presumably they shot him, but you don't see it.
Right.
Why would we need to see it?
Because, you know,
Make sure he still had the knife.
I mean, we know he's
you want
dead.
to know when he was shot, you know, how close did he get to the police officer? You know,
He was too close already.
How about after he was shot? Is there any interest in seeing what happened after?
yeah, see if it was a real knife, or was he carrying a stick, or,
What if he didn't die right away?
yeah.
Is there blood on his shirt?
There is, I forget all the facts of the case. I believe he was in an accident, or he was obviously injured in some way prior to this
And
encounter.
this brings up a whole other issue of, you know, police tactics and, you know, protocols.
Why did they shoot him?
And how do we discuss those tactics? Like,
So you can, yeah, you need to be able to see it all.
unless we see it all.
Yeah.
We'll end on this point right here. We released a statement last November because as critical as we can be government officials, we think that it's important to give credit when it's due. And in Rhode Island, maybe you recall, there was an incident in Providence, police officer involved shooting on the highway. Both Providence police as well as state police were involved. And we thought it was really interesting the different ways both police departments responded after the shooting. The Providence police not only released to the public the names of the officers that were involved, all of the shots that were fired, as well as the city-managed surveillance video. But the state police were tight-lipped about everything. Wouldn't even mention who the officers were that were on the scene. State police said they don't even use body cameras. So even within law enforcement itself, you have this real difference in approach as to, well, what is the public entitled to? Why is it entitled to this information? And we thought it was, you know, we're often very critical of law enforcement and public bodies, but in this case, we thought Providence police did the right thing. And in fact, state police should take some notes and follow suit. And I'll leave it at that. But please, I'll stick around as long as you want me to. If you have any specific questions or anything else you want to discuss, please let me know. I'll stick around.
Yeah, we
Thank
have
you.
time for a few questions. I want to just cover a couple of things that I forgot to mention when we started. First of all, you'll be interested to know that Justin is a local boy, having grown up in Barnstable. So he's come back today to do this great service for us, and I want to thank him. This was on short notice. As you know, last month I announced at the class meeting that Ken Calvert was supposed to speak to us. And I want to thank Mike Arnold for coming up with a replacement really quickly, and Justin for being able to step in so quickly on short notice. So I'll just leave the floor open for a couple of minutes for questions, and then we'll break in about 5 minutes, and anybody who wants to come up and speak to the speaker individually, as long as he can stay, he will. Thank you.
You talk about, being able to think what's going on now with the FBI and the right for us to know what was going on. They just get up there and lie. I mean, here's the evidence. This is what he said. And either he said it at night when he couldn't remember, but he did take it in shorthand and he couldn't remember the next time he was talked about. I mean, they just get up there and lie.
Okay.
And the papers, I don't think the papers, everything that's leaked to the papers, there's no truth in many of them, what they say. I mean, so if you're talking about truth, it's a joke today. It's kind of a joke. And I know you guys are trying to do the best you can. But as far as, me as a citizen looking at lawmakers and our newspapers, our journalists, if that's what they want to call themselves. Yeah.
Well, we could certainly have a whole conversation about journalism, and I will say, not all journalists are the same, right? There are many very well qualified and extremely talented journalists that are doing a great job. I mentioned Todd Wallach as one who works for the Boston Globe, and if you haven't read his articles, you should. He's been doing incredible investigations on the state police in particular, using public record laws. But I hear your concerns, many of them share them, and maybe that could be a topic of a.
But you talk about the Globe, you probably mentioned one of the good ones, one out of what, 100? If I paid
There are many.
on that paper? I mean,
Yes.
you know, I disagree with you, but that's okay.
It's a freedom of speech, even if they're lying through their teeth.
Right.
So, I mean, we can talk about First Amendment issues generally, but we're getting away from
I
public
want to
records.
bring in, like, so as far as the press goes,
Yeah.
the media, where is the accountability as far as, the people's power to keep them accountable? They always seem to be so quick to remind us that they are the press, that they have the protections under the Constitution to have special information, like, the guy's name is Chris Cuomo tried to remind us about the WikiLeaks, that, it's almost, criminal for the peons, the regular people to have access to that information, that it should go through the filter of the press. But what happens when the press is corrupt, when it's controlled by 5 corporations, these thousands of other people, you're basically getting the same information from the same source on all the different channels. So now where's the accountability? Where does the law come in? Where does the First Amendment and our statutes nationally and statewide? Are there current laws that we could, what kind of steps can we physically take? What's some practical things that we as citizens can start petitioning our elected officials or our state government to start holding our press accountable?
What would you like to see done?
Well, I would like to see, when you can plainly see that,
I think we all want the truth.
Right.
But if a newspaper, for example, makes a mistake,
yeah,
what would
right.
you like the punishment to be?
Yeah, I guess.
Stop firing.
So, well, obviously there's that, right?
That's one course of action.
That's how America was set up, was for the people to act. That there would be an active populace, that we would hold our people accountable by raising, by not buying that paper or not supporting those, advertisers.
Yeah.
I get that. But we have a low information populace who's being completely propagandized, who doesn't have the information, don't have the interest. And so now the power's been, monopolized. And
let me give you one solution. It's not an easy one, and I'll propose a solution acknowledging that. But I think one thing that journalists need to do better, that they just simply aren't now, is being more transparent themselves and letting the public know this is how we do our jobs. This is why we should have your faith. This is why what we write is credible. Because what I find often, not necessarily within this group, but just in general, speaking to everybody, the media is blamed for a lot. And the media encompasses everybody, from the Hannitys and Madhouse to the world, to those at the Boston Globe and Washington Post, to the Wall Street Journal, to Hollywood, to Hollywood, to the Capitol Gazette. It encompasses everybody, and they're not all the same. And most of the complaints I hear, not all, but most of the complaints I hear are relative to cable news. And most of the people you see on cable news, I would argue, are just partisan personalities and aren't, as I would define the word, a journalist. They're there to entertain, they're there to talk about their opinion, but they're not doing the hard work, generally speaking, that journalists are. And I think journalists as a whole could do a lot better job at just describing those differences. So the difference between Todd Wallach, who I mentioned, and some other journalist who you think is writing absolute garbage and lying through their teeth. It's hard for the public to distinguish one from the other. And the responsibility really needs to be on journalists to explain.
When it's being manipulated by Google and Facebook, it's hard to discern, because they're feeding you what they want you to know.
Yeah,
and they're colluding in office buildings together between the media and the Facebook, and these people are just saying, we're going to hold this information, and so this is what's frustrating. I understand, now I'm kind of going off here. It comes down to basically people getting active and demanding it, really.
And there's a lot of issues, and you can talking about Google and other, Google's not a social media company, but Facebook and others. That's a whole other set of issues. How do you deal with that? How do you get people out of their echo chamber? it's, those are really difficult and complicated issues because it's Facebook, the press. Maybe in some aspects it could be, but as a whole, it's a press should be treated as a news organization. For the first, as I understand it, many years of Facebook's life, it never wanted to be treated as a news organization. But it's hard to argue that in some respects.
But now they're trying to tell you what good information is and what isn't. And now they have tools to help you decipher all of these fake news claims.
So how do you get away from that? How do you tell
you have to, be interested. You have to go look at different sources. You have to start digging yourself and be a citizen journalist, really.
Not many people are willing to do that.
You can't trust it anymore.
Oh, yeah.
You can't trust people.
You're in the right room.
They don't take that away. They don't go, they give you just enough to keep the people at bay, to see and make them feel like, hey, we're on your side, but we're still controlled by the same, people at the top telling you what stories you will give to the public and what you won't.
But the biggest problem we have is you take it to court and you've got a corrupt judge sitting there and he's gonna take the money from the other side and shoot you down. Now, right here in Barnstable County, I've gone through the courthouse.
So how do we exercise our First Amendment to?
You don't have one. You don't have a right.
How do we change it?
You are dealing with corruption, with people who have an agenda, okay? I go to court and I say to the judge, and he says, okay, I'll consider it. The statute says, no matter what he does, I have a right to appeal. Okay? He writes on his decision, no appeal. Violating the law.
So I guess it goes
And
back
they
to
get
shining the
away
light.
with it.
Talk to the
Okay?
commission, another solution. In Massachusetts, as I mentioned, the judiciary is covered by the public records, and there's a commission right now that's looking into the issue. Maybe nothing will happen from it. I hope that's not the case, but
What's the
maybe
name of the
something will. Email me, and not only will I give you, it's like the special commission to look at public records, but I will give you the contact information if you
And
just.
what jurisdiction are they under?
This would be for the entire state of Massachusetts. It's a commission of.
Special state commission.
It's a special state commission to look at public records specifically, how it applies or should apply to the governor, legislature, and judiciary.
Yeah.
And you can write them. You can write them, you can tell them, your thoughts, why the judiciary should be covered by the public records law, why we need more accountability and should have that transparency, but for the governor and legislature too. That's one very good and easy way to use your voice and to express those thoughts to the people that need to listen, and hopefully they'll do something with it.
Let's adjourn and we can continue the conversation up front. And that way, anybody who wants to leave can go. Once again, thank you, Justin.
Thank you.